Welcome to my latest YouTube video. My name is Rosenberg. I am the author of The Human Magnet Syndrome and the creator of the Codependency Cure, or its other name, Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program. Today I'm here to talk to you about marriage therapy and how extremely dangerous it can be if it is with a codependent, or what I call a person who's self-love deficient, or an SLD. Please know that I changed the name codependency to self-love deficit disorder, SLDD, and the codependent is now the self-love deficient, or SLD. So this video highlights the absolute danger and my extreme warning for any SLD, whether in recovery or still kind of stuck in the disorder, to be in marriage therapy. I almost always, across the board, recommend no to it. Now, let me just be really clear and tell you a little bit about my background. You know, I'm a licensed psychotherapist. I've been in the field 32 years. I got a license and a bunch of certification credentials. And I also was trained and experienced as a marriage and family therapist. And I am a great fan and supporter of marriage therapy. But let me be clear. Do not go to marriage therapy if you are an SLD or a codependent, because it is an accident waiting to happen. Let me begin with something that I talk about in great lengths in my 4-hour Buyer's Guide to Good Psychotherapy video, which is available at selfloverecovery.com. Not all therapists are the same, and I cannot overemphasize that. There are so many different types of educations and trainings. Once you accept that as a fact, then you have to consider the difference in theoretical orientation. We therapists require a theoretical orientation in order to instruct our approach to therapy. Think of it like, if any of you guys are computer geeks, think of it as firmware, which is the software that instructs any piece of technology, whether it's a phone or a computer, how to work. A theoretical orientation gives direction and guidance to the therapist. So, you know, whether they're a Freudian psychoanalytic theory, they're cognitive behavioral theory, self-psychology theory, there's a myriad of theoretical orientations. It gives the therapist an explanation for the problem, why the problem happens, and ultimately the solution to resolve a solution or direction to resolving the problem. Now, to be fair, someone who has been in the field as long as I have, or a good amount of time, they operate by a number of theoretical orientations. The other thing is that not everyone has mastery of what they have learned. Now, that goes all the way back to someone's education. It can go back to their mastery of basic counseling skills, or their mastery of a theoretical orientation. In addition, and this is probably the most profoundly important element, is not all therapists have the same level of positive or good mental health. And I've talked about this in almost any one of my seminar videos or live seminars, especially my Buyer's Guide to Good Psychotherapy. A psychotherapist is only as good as their mental health and their ability to see their own problems within themselves. So if you are a psychotherapist with mental health problems, say you are an SLD, or for that matter, say you are a pathological narcissist, you have narcissistic personality disorder or other narcissistic disorders, you will be qualitatively different and more than likely ineffective in your role as a marriage therapist or a couples therapy. And let me say, in fact, I should have started the video, whenever I say marriage therapy, I'm really referring to couples therapy. A psychotherapist who has SLDD, codependency, views the world through their own rose-colored glasses. They are in denial of their own core shame, their own experience of pathological loneliness, and even their own addiction, their SLDD or codependency addiction, which many of you who follow me understand all those concepts. So, and I should add, it is likely, highly likely, they are in relationships with a pathological narcissist, vis-a-vis my human magnet syndrome work. So if you have a psychotherapist who is an SLD, who lives with a narcissist, or is alone and not living with a narcissist, who has a theoretical orientation that does not match up with what you need, say you go in for marriage therapy and you're trying to resolve a problem with your pathological narcissist, and your marriage therapist has a very, what I would call, didactic, problem-solving, homework-based approach. That can backfire because the therapist is seeing the problem mechanically. They're seeing the problem according to their own education, their own theoretical orientation, which is, more than likely, is to find out what are the problems within the relationship, the system, identify those, help people see those problems, and come up with a plan to resolve them. Now that is all fine and dandy if we're dealing with the wide range, and I mean wide range, of potential normal people who seek psychotherapy. Again, marriage therapy, and let me define normal. Abnormal is someone with a personality, a couple with a personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and of course, according to the human magnet syndrome, someone who is codependent or who is an SLD. I cannot overemphasize that being normal is not the absence of problems. It's just the ability to, and the willingness to solve them. If a couple is comprised of an SLD and, let's say, a covert narcissist, and this, the marriage or couples therapist is not trained or educated in covert narcissism, pathological narcissism, SLDD, or codependency, they are going to see the couple through the lens of their training and theoretical orientation. So going back to the structural or strategic theoretical orientation of marriage, family, or couples therapy, where you identify the problem, you get the partners to see the problem, and if they don't see the problem, then you just come up with a solution to get them to solve it in a way that it rebalances the relationship. And that is a very powerful, effective way to do marriage, couples, and family therapy. That's a great theoretical orientation. But if you are not educated on pathological narcissism, you do not know that much about these pathological narcissistic personality disorders. And as I explain in my Human Magnet Syndrome book, there are 3 of them. Borderline personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, which is also known as sociopathy or the sociopath, or psychopathy or the psychopath, and narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. And just to further complicate things, narcissistic personality disorder is subdivided into other categories such as covert narcissism, overt narcissism, productive narcissism, and malignant narcissism. Okay, so back to the point. Your theoretical orientation is, say, structural strategic. It could be, for that matter, a Gottman approach, which, of course, I believe is one of the best marriage therapy approaches there is. It could be Harvo Hendrix's imago therapy, which is as good, if not better. It's hard to say which is better when they're both icons in the field. And you are not familiar with the limitations of a person with a personality disorder. You're not familiar with what self-love deficit disorder is, which is precisely why I wrote my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. And more than that, you are not familiar with the reason the two are together, what brings them together and what keeps them together, that human magnet syndrome bond, that the opposite matching, the chemistry, the opposite chemistry. And if you are oblivious to these important clinical dynamics, you are going to see the couple as normal. Remember my definition of normal. and assume that with good psychotherapy, good couples and marriage psychotherapy, you will bring the two together in a process that will not only address the problem, even if they're not aware of the problem. Again, the way psychotherapy can be done is you can address it and solve the problem and people not being aware of it and them actually moving forward and feeling better about it, or you can involve them in a more psychoeducational process and explain to them the problem and together work on them. It's a different theoretical orientation and both can work just as well. Without the education, the knowledge of these two pathological types of individuals, which I explain in my Human Magnet Center book on my relationship compatibility continuum. Not only do I explain how they're opposites, I also explain how they are connected, magnetically like connected. So without the understanding of what keeps them, what drew them together, what started off as the soulmate process that devolved into the cellmate process, or why this magnetic pull keeps them together and the subjective experience of the SLD or the codependent and the narcissist. If you do not understand gaslighting, if you do not understand how antisocial personality disorder manifests either as a diagnosis in itself, someone who has ASPD is a sociopath or a psychopath, but also the person who has narcissistic personality disorder but has is subcategorized as a covert narcissist. Now these are individuals who have this narcissistic personality disorder, but they have elements of sociopathy. If you're also not aware of the interaction of coexisting addictions, it's very common that people who are SLDs or pathological narcissists abuse substances. Over 60% of SLDs have a coexisting substance abuse or addiction problem. And it makes sense because you think, they're hurting so much internally or psychologically, more often than not aware of it. And if you followed my Healing the Inner Trauma Child psychotherapy or treatment approach, got a video on that in my Self-Love Recovery Institute, you know that SLDD is created by unconscious forces because of the SLD's attachment trauma. Okay, so if you're a psychotherapist and you don't understand what SLDD is, codependency, and you don't know what the pathological narcissist is, and you don't understand the interaction, and you don't know what gaslighting is, and you don't understand that the pathological narcissist, say the covert narcissist or the sociopath, they have this element of sociopathy, which just by itself means that the person is adept and able to trick and lie to people in ways that are undetectable unless you know what to look for. Okay, so we have a couple who go to marriage therapy. And by the way, you can take this to the bank. Pathological narcissists do not like marriage therapists. And whenever I do an intake with my SLD, a new codependent client, I almost always will hear the same story, that they wanted and wanted and wanted and begged and pleaded with their narcissistic partner to go to marriage therapy. And the narcissistic partner refused, because most pathological narcissists do not like psychotherapy, do not like psychotherapists, have had bad experiences with them, or when they have gone, they have quit. Because all it takes is just one comment by a psychotherapist that would be considered a normal accountability comment, and they have a narcissistic injury, and they project, they put on to the therapist what they don't see and accept in themselves, characteristics of the therapist. They're stupid, they're opinionated, they don't listen, they're taking your side, and they quit marriage therapy. Huge red flag. It's a huge red flag, and there's so many ways to diagnose a pathological narcissist. But one of the many, especially that I use, is when I hear that they go to marriage therapy and the marriage therapy doesn't last, or it centers all around the narcissist's point of view. Okay, so let me stay on track here. So we've got theoretical orientation, we have education, we have mastery, we have understanding of clinical populations such as SLDD, codependency, pathological narcissism, and the human magnet syndrome connection, gaslighting, all of which I have full-length seminar videos at Self-Love Recovery Institute. Information will be in the description. Okay, so let's go through a typical case of marriage therapy with a therapist who doesn't have a clue. Now, by the way, this could be a good therapist who is good in almost everything they do, including marriage therapy. Just to be clear, I'm not here slamming marriage therapists, but a good marriage therapist who does not understand what we just talked about. Or it could be a bad marriage therapist or someone with poor and underdeveloped skills. If you don't know what a person's diagnosis is, you can't see it. So I'm going back to if you don't know it, you can't, if you don't have a theoretical education, or orientation or education, you can't make sense of what you see. And without that, you are seeing just a normal couple that is arguing, that is having problems, and you are then going to kind of snap into your marriage therapy theoretical orientation and abilities. If the marriage therapist is an SLD, now let me be really clear, is that most psychotherapists start off their career as SLDs or codependent. It's just a fact. And I explain that in my book, and I learned that through Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child. We psychotherapists who start off as SLDs, we are trained and often just compelled to keep going to therapy. And the good ones get healthier as their career moves forward, and they move past and overcome their SLDD or codependency. The not so good ones get stuck or mired into their SLDD, just like any problem, ignore it, deny it. And remember, if you're an SLD therapist and you don't know you have it, you don't see it in others. Okay, so if you're an SLD therapist and you have a pathological narcissist, and I'm just going to go your garden variety overt narcissist and an SLD, you are going to try to find the middle ground within which to try to resolve the problem. You will not know or see that the problem can't be resolved when only one person is willing to take responsibility for it, have empathy and remorse for the problems, while the other one blames the other for having the problem, has limited to no remorse or empathy, and gets very, very angry when they're not agreed with. And what happens in these psychotherapy sessions, and I know that because I did this back in the olden days when I was a marriage therapist and I didn't know what I know, is you spend an inordinate amount of time, say 85% of the time, trying to calm the narcissist, trying to get them to see it objectively, neutrally, so that you can find a common ground in order to address a problem. And that's really difficult. But if you're good, you spend 85% of the time, and you are ever so careful not to upset the narcissist. And what happens accidentally is you have been triangulated. You have demonstrated a stronger bond and regard for the narcissist, even if you don't feel it, because you spent 75% of your time getting them to talk or getting them to calm down and getting them to be rational. And in that process, you've not listened to or involved the SLD client. And so the SLD's experience is that they feel small, diminutive, invisible, marginalized, which is illustrative of their experience with life and the marriage. So even the well-intended marriage therapist is going to triangulate or side with the narcissist just by the fact that they are trying to contain the narcissist to find a middle ground in order to have something successful. But it gets worse. If you are an SLD therapist and your problem or your disorder is just out of control, you are likely to be afraid of the narcissist. your attachment trauma, which is PTSD-like, which I go into in my full-length 6-hour Healing the Inner Trauma Child, or HITCH method video. Your attachment trauma is unconscious, so you're not aware of it. So you're psychologically reacting to the narcissist. It's frightening you, but you're not aware of it. And you are reactive, trying to avoid the narcissist's anger, retaliation. And therefore, you are paralleling the experience of the other person, the SLD. What we have there are two injured people trying to control the narcissist, one of whom is the professional and the other is the SLD. In that capacity, in that role as a psychotherapist, the SLD client is traumatized because now they're in marriage therapy. They're seeing the marriage therapist afraid, perhaps traumatized. And by the way, SLDs can see this in a heartbeat. They have this radar for such things. And so the SLD sees the therapist kind of victimized and not in control of the process. The SLD client, this is the twisted part. Then they try to rescue the therapist. Remember, SLDs will do everything to help someone else and not worry or complain, and sometimes not even know they're being neglected. So then this client is now trying to enable the therapist who's trying to mollify, to ingratiate, to please the narcissist. And what we have is just a big cluster bleep. And the client leaves and they're traumatized. The other extremely dangerous element of marriage therapy with a therapist who doesn't understand what the heck's going on is the consequence to the therapist pushing his or her agenda. Say a good therapist who is direct and assertive and can contain the narcissist, who is good enough to direct the traffic of conversation, to set boundaries. And narcissists generally, especially if they're covert narcissists, the overt narcissist is just going to get really angry, upset, and might even just walk out. But the covert narcissist, the sociopathic narcissist, are just going to sit there and stew. And the SLD is going to be sitting there, shaking in their boots, knowing that when this session is over, they're going to pay. Now, the therapist who doesn't understand this dynamic thinks they're doing really well and are holding the narcissist accountable and feels like they're standing up and protecting the SLD client. But really, what they're doing is they're endangering them. Because if you were aware of this dynamic, which I hope you are now because you're watching this video, and if you are aware of this dynamic, the dynamic of retribution and consequence with the covert narcissist or the sociopathic narcissist, you will know that it is absolutely dangerous to do marriage therapy. You will make a correct diagnosis, and you will either limit the session to maybe 1 or 2, or you will say that you cannot help the couple and find a way to give the SLD a referral. Now, it's done commonly. I don't recommend it, but it happens. A lot of marriage therapists will work with the individual, the SLD, and not the narcissist. The ethics are questionable on this. It's only unethical, extremely unethical, if you work with both of them. Or even more unethical if you work with a pathological narcissist who then will use, and I've seen this happen, where the therapy breaks off and the pathological narcissist is a sociopath or a covert narcissist, are very charming. They end up meeting with the therapist, who could be a narcissist themselves, could be an SLD, whatever they are. They're convinced by the charm and the beguiling nature of this, the sociopathic or narcissistic client, their point of view of the marriage problem, and they provide individual therapy to the narcissist. The SLD does not want to be with this therapist because they sense it's dangerous and this person is taken aside. And what happens is now they have empowered, enabled the narcissist, who then weaponizes the sessions to use as proof to further control and demean and harm the SLD. It happens more than you probably think, but it only happens with the group of psychotherapists who are unethical. I submit to you that the great majority of psychotherapists are ethical. and they make as much money as how many clients they see a week. And if things are tough for them, losing a client, losing 2 clients is a big chunk of money. And for those therapists who are more focused about money or afraid to losing money, or who are having financial problems, who err on the unethical side or land on the unethical side, they will keep clients longer because they're afraid of losing money. And if you are that type of therapist, independent of all the other issues, the theoretical orientation, the education, the mental health, all the stuff that I talked about, you will keep marriage therapy going longer because you won't either think of terminating it, which means you are doing this unconsciously, you're unaware of it, or you're aware that you can't afford to lose them, so you're going to talk yourself into thinking you can help them. Now, even the therapists who are in this gray area of ethics, they likely can be doing this unconsciously and not aware of it. All in all, what I'm saying, and listen carefully, is marriage and couples therapy does not work for couples who are SLD, codependent, and pathological narcissist matched. And that's how it always is. If you haven't read it, read my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. And I promise you, you will be convinced that there is no other way that an SLD can be in a long-term stable. When I say stable, I mean enduring, not a qualitative stable, but a stable relationship with anyone other than a pathological narcissist. And I say, according to the Human Magnet Syndrome, the same thing about a pathological narcissist. I want to remind you guys is I'm a huge fan of marriage therapy. And marriage therapy is good. But why begin a therapy process that has no possibility of success? Think about this. If you are trained, educated, and have a solid theoretical orientation of the impact of a personality disorder such as NPD, BPD, or ASPD on a relationship, you'll understand that the primary diagnostic symptoms of all personality disorders is an enduring set of traits and characteristics that are dysfunctional and pathological, that go all the way back to someone's adolescence or childhood, for which the person is rarely conscious about, rarely understands the negative impact on others, and rarely, almost never seeks help for. So if you know about people with personality disorders, then you know that marriage therapy just by itself is a waste of time. How can you get someone to participate in a process that relies on the interaction of 2 people trying to take responsibility for their problems and coming up with a solution? How can that work with someone who has a personality disorder? Conversely, if someone is an SLD or a codependent who is blind to their problem, and if you don't know this now, please read my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome, or go at Self-Love Recovery Institute, and I have 15 6-hour videos explaining codependency and SLDD and everything else about it. You'll understand that this is a disorder that its foundation is the attachment trauma that is unconscious, disassociated from the SLD's awareness, that is fortified by core shame that is at least 50% unconscious, repressed, or disassociated. And then we have the SLDD or codependency addiction, which is a real problem. Any SLD that I know, and I know a lot because I've been working with them, write about them, is they will talk about the addiction-like experience of trying to stop their drug of choice, which is the relationship, so that they don't have to feel the pathological loneliness, which leads to the unbearable feeling of core shame. So if the therapist doesn't understand that, then it's just a mistake waiting to happen. So what I do recommend, my guess is you are an SLD or someone who fits what I consider someone with self-love deficit disorder, because narcissists don't generally watch my videos, nor do they like them, unless they're the ones that have convinced themselves that they're the codependent, which are plenty. But if you're an SLD, take heed to this. Lastly, and this might seem like a contradiction, but I promise you that it is not. Lastly, this is when marriage therapy is good. Check this out. Marriage therapy is good for an SLD and a pathological narcissist. I don't really want to digress into my 10-stage self-love recovery treatment program, but stage 4 is when I prepare the SLD to finally setting boundaries, which is stage 5. Stage 4 is preparing for the narcissistic storm, and stage 5 is setting boundaries in a hostile environment. And what I do in stage 4 is I prepare the SLD with all of the information and all of the tasks and they need to do in order to protect themselves and be ready for the fight of their life in stage 5. And many times it's to go to the marriage therapy, find a good one, for the purpose of watching it fail. Because if you are an SLD and you are aware of what's going on, you have broken your addiction, you have your pathological loneliness in check, you can go to marriage therapy and you can see clearly that when you are doing everything right and you have now this whole scenario relies on a good marriage therapist and the therapy falls apart, then that's great evidence for you or the SLD who has been teetering on and off of this whole denial teeter-totter. And to finally see that when you are calm and clear, you've learned and mastered my observe, don't absorb technique, you understand my technique of induced conversation, and you go to marriage therapy and you see that it completely explodes because you don't get sucked into the narcissist. The therapist does not get sucked into it and it falls apart. And those failed marriage therapy sessions are highly rewarding to the SLD in that it proves to them that this problem is not solvable. And in stage 4, that's precisely what I try to do, is I try to show people that they must understand the dynamics of their SLDD. They must understand the dynamics of pathological narcissists and the interaction. And once they can see how the two interact, especially when the recovering SLDD is healthy, it leads them into a stronger, more optimistic and realistic experience once they finally get to stage 5 and set the boundaries. I am going to end with mediation. No, it doesn't work. Oh my gosh, no, it doesn't work. Mediation is not the same as marriage therapy. But lawyers, when they're good lawyers, when they're bad lawyers, when the court systems are doing well and when they're not doing well, they always say, go to mediation and save money. Stay away. You cannot mediate with a pathological narcissist who is incapable of accepting some middle ground, taking responsibility. And if they do, what I believe is that they're hiding something. A pathological narcissist who goes into mediation that strikes a deal fairly easily and everyone is happy means that something is hidden. They have an ulterior motive. So with that, thank you for listening to this YouTube video. Thank you for supporting my work. And thank you for following me, perhaps buying my Human Magnet Syndrome book or going on Self-Love Recovery Institute at selfloverecovery.com and purchasing my full-length seminars. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you, and I hope this has been helpful to you, and be well. Bye-bye.